was diagnosed with diabetes in 1997. It's probably a total of 8 years. I started to be extremely thirsty. I couldn't quench that thirst, and I took off an excessive amount of weight, which for me is a big thing. And obviously I had that nighttime business where you urinate 3 or 4 times. You have to get up out of bed and urinate, and at that I went to a GP. I always remember the number that I was diagnosed with. It was 25. Very interesting. The first reaction I had when the doctor said to me, "You have diabetes," was I felt a flush of relief that, thank God, it wasn't cancer. Probably not recognising how difficult this is to manage, but that was my first reaction.
How did you come to return for more detailed medical attention recently?
They discovered I had an ovarian cyst. I went to my local GP and he had a CT scan done. It was a massive cyst, and I went to the gynecologist and he recommended going to you because again at that stage my diabetes was very mismanaged by myself.
How long ago was that?
That would be approximately 2 years now. At that stage the ovarian cyst had to be operated on, so I was put into hospital, and not only that, but I had to have my diabetes managed or stabilised before they could operate on me.
How did you react when you were told you needed to take more control of your diabetes?
Badly. It felt like a huge intrusion on my life and a huge lifestyle change that I wasn't willing at that stage to take on board.
What was the effect?
I went into huge denial, and I did minimal amounts of whatever was suggested for me just to make myself feel like I was doing the right thing, but realistically I was not at all.
How are you handling things at that point?
It was very tough because it's very tough to say to yourself, I actually have denial and I see that it's not working. I see that my blood sugar levels are not where they should be by my HbA1c tests on a regular basis every 3 months. So probably for a fair while there I was just travelling along hoping that it would all just go away.
What changed your attitude?
I think eventually I come to a realisation that a lot of the problems that come with long-term diabetes, like kidney, retinopathy, etc., your heart, would get me in the end if I didn't get a hold of it. So I don't think I sat down and had a good talk to myself, but I think subconsciously I thought I've really got to do something here serious about this.
Was there anyone or anything you found helpful in changing?
Yes, I think that's important. I actually went to a community clinic. I thought to myself, I've really got to do something here, so I went to a psychologist at a community clinic. She and I talked for probably about a month, and then she recommended me to go to the eating disorder clinic, of which I saw a counsellor and a dietitian. Also, the diabetic educator was of great value for me because she made me understand the workings of diabetes and how it works in the real world when you've got to do it 24 hours a day.
What would have happened if you hadn't sought that assistance?
If I was just left to keep managing it the way I was, I would have kept mismanaging it like I did for probably the 5.5 years before I went into hospital. I would have kept on going on the same way until something major happened to me.
Were there any references you found helpful?
It was actually on an ABC program that I just got the tail end of a book by a fellow by the name of Polonsky. He's an American psychiatrist, and he wrote a book on the psychology behind diabetes and why we behave the way we behave. And for me, it has been an absolutely fabulous book, almost like a Bible.
Correction. Professor Polonsky is a psychologist. The book Janine found so helpful was Diabetes Burnout by William H. Polonsky, 1999, American Diabetes Association. How are things progressing?
been a slow progression because it's a difficult thing to change your lifestyle totally. The diet's one of the biggest factors, and for me I've made small changes in focusing on GI, basically eating the correct GI foods, changing from high fat to low fat foods, and the psychology behind my behaviour has been really interesting to me, to understand why I am who I am, and things like the rebel in my nature that I have to not control but just curve a little bit. Those sort of factors have helped me get a hold of being a diabetic much better.
What about exercise?
I've now instigated into the program a fair bit of swimming. I squad swim and I lap swim twice a week. You can feel the difference with the exercise factor. You can feel how much better you feel straight after having done that exercise. When I get to BSLs of 13, I start to feel very tired, extremely tired, and a little depressed. Definitely feeling like a healthier person, wanting to get into life more.
Adapting to diabetes.
I think there's been a fair few stages. For me, I think I started very resentful of the whole process, resentful of actually having diabetes. Working my way through that resentment and becoming almost at ease with my diabetes. I don't think I'm there at all yet totally, but I think I'm way more at ease than I was originally. That then opened up room for me to become comfortable with having to do a lot more lifestyle changes, not resenting every single little one. For instance, taking BSLs 3 and 4 times a day, those sort of things.
Barriers to blood glucose testing.
I think the resentment was the major barrier, and I think the discomfort was another reason, an added reason. And the technology these days of what I have now been offered in the way of a meter, in that I can now do my BSLs on my calf, my thigh, my arm, mean that the pain has gone away, the pain factor. I don't get extremely sore tips to my fingers. It's made a huge change in my willingness to do my BSLs.
How significant was the pain or discomfort factor in blood glucose testing?
It is extremely important to know that there is absolutely, for me, obviously different skin types would be different, for me there is no pain whatsoever, and therefore it just takes that factor away. Once that was taken away, I then worked with one of my counsellors on cognitive therapies for getting myself to take BSLs. That was an important part of a change in my the way I handle my diabetes.
What were some of the barriers to taking over management of your diabetes?
I think the biggest one, as I've mentioned before, is the resentment. Therefore, I wouldn't do the BSLs. I'd just find any reason to not do them. They may have been totally invalid reasons, but to me, in my brain, they were, yes, I've got to go and do something else before I do those BSLs, and then I would just let that lapse. I wouldn't eat breakfast properly at all. I'd be lucky to eat lunch, and then by dinner time I'd overeat. So obviously for that time my BSLs were way out. But for me, because I didn't take them and didn't see the numbers in front of me, it wasn't nearly so scary. When you see bad numbers, it becomes scary. When you see good BSL numbers, you feel an elation inside, like you're in control of your life.
Have you graduated from irregular self-management to something more regular now?
I'm not sure I'm beyond that yet. I think I'm still working my way through that, because I'm not, from what I can gather, that's one of the biggest things with diabetics. I have a few friends who are, and taking those BSLs on a regular basis is very tough. You tend to find reasons why you can't. I'm probably still at the stage where I'm taking my BSLs fairly regularly, but not as well as I possibly could.
Adapting socially.
Socially, it's very difficult. If you're out in public, playing hockey, even if you drag that meter out or have to have insulin, it's really, really difficult. I've become more at ease with doing it though. It becomes like second nature now. What I call the diabetic police become very difficult. They are relatives, friends, well-meaning friends, become the police of your life and feel as though it's they're doing you good if they ask you difficult questions about have you eaten, have you taken your insulin, etc. It depends on how you deal with it. At first I used to resent that tremendously. Now I just understand that it's them trying to help me. But socially it's difficult. I actually stopped drinking. Not that I was a heavy drinker before, but I just realised that that wasn't the answer for me, which socially is difficult because people keep trying to push you. Just have a bourbon, Janine. Just have this, just have that. And I feel really strong internally now in saying, no thanks. I feel good about that. So there's a million different social factors where your life changes totally with diabetes.
What advice would you give young people with diabetes who are having trouble saying no to alcohol?
I think that's a difficult one because I don't think it's actually particularly diabetes related. I think that's a problem that young children suffer, or teenagers specifically suffer. It's a hard one. My personality never really had trouble in saying no, but I think it's like an independence and a self-assuredness that you've got to feel inside. You've got to feel good about yourself, and by saying no, that helps you to feel good about yourself and continue to do that. And there's the bonus of obviously feeling better the next day, because if you do actually drink while you're taking insulin, you feel horrific the next day, you really do. And probably for 2 or 3 days later, you feel dreadful, you can hardly function.
Double whammy. Diabetes plus an eating disorder.
It's a difficult thing because it becomes, the management of your diabetes becomes very, very complex when you also add to it an eating disorder, specifically binge eating, which would have to be the worst thing for diabetes because you have an eating plan that you virtually have to set to, and by binge eating, you're breaking that constantly. With a counsellor, I've worked my way through a fair bit. Binge eating way less than I was, therefore my diabetes is being managed much better. I can see the differences with the blood sugar meter. And binge eating creates a psychology of guilt, which is a difficult thing to work with. But I seem to be hopefully getting on top of it. I do tend to not try and say I'm there yet, because I think it's a lifetime struggle, but I feel way better than I did 2 years ago when I first started.